Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, a teaching ministry emphasizing God's unconditional love and grace. Today, join Andrew as he interviews David Barton and Pastor Mark Cowart about Christians and politics. And now, here's Andrew.
Welcome to our Gospel Truth broadcast. This is going to be a very special program, and I tell you, it's going to be unlike probably anything we've ever done, maybe anything you've ever seen. We've had a great time talking before this program started, and I believe it's going to just heat up and get better. But I've got David Barton with me, the president and founder of Wall Builders, and of course you got many things to your name, and we'll be talking about that more. And Mark Cowart, he's a pastor of Church for All Nations here in Colorado Springs, and he has, I think, 4 different locations. And one of the things that brings us together is we are starting a practical government school at Charis Bible College. David Barton is setting the curriculum using a lot of his curriculum that he has. Mark Cowart, as a local pastor here, is going to be the point man who actually makes it work at our Charis Bible College. And so we want to talk about that, and I am excited about how that Charis Bible College and other schools now, Christian schools, are beginning to get in and to start taking a stand on this. So we're going to be talking about that. But also, we want to discuss Christians and politics in this election year. And we are facing a critical time in this nation. And you know, in the past, Christians have basically been cowed into submission. And man, we aren't going to go that direction. So real quickly, let me just make this introductory statement, and then we'll cut you guys loose and we'll just start discussing how should a Christian respond to this. But here's something that a friend of mine sent me that said the next president is going to have a potential of electing anywhere from 2 to 5 Supreme Court justices over the next year. Ginsburg is 82 years old, Kennedy is 80, Breyer is 77, Thomas is 67, and statistics show that the average age of a Supreme Court justice is 75. So over the next 4 to 8 years, that would mean that up to 5 vacancies could be filled. If the president appoints young justices, this means that for the next 40 or 50 years, the thing could be stacked 7-2 against Christianity and against all the conservative causes. So that is just one thing that is highlighting how important all of this is. So.
Well, let me jump right on that for a minute, because just recently the court has not started this new term, it just finished this last term. And we have for a number of years now been making great progress on the life issue. And we're getting closer and closer and closer, and suddenly this Supreme Court with Scalia gone off, it did a about face, and we passed a law in Texas that said, you know, we really think that women ought to receive the same level of medical care that a vet gives to animals at a vet hospital. Yeah. And the Supreme Court said, oh, no, they don't need that level of medical care because that would shut down abortion clinics. And so they went in a radical direction of now all the progress we've made in the last 4 years. Each of the last 4 years, we have passed record numbers of pro-life laws at the state legislatures. And so it's probably now over 4 years, probably in the vicinity of 300 to 400 laws we've passed that are pro-life. Abortion numbers are dropping dramatically. Yeah. It's all going the right way. And now the Supreme Court says, whoa, all the states, you're wrong. We want to go the other direction. And that's just one example.
Because Scalia
is not there. And the next president will have Scalia's position to fill, and possibly several others that come up. And Scalia's position to be filled by another Scalia-type, God-fearing conservative just keeps us status quo. If we lose Scalia's position and it goes the opposite direction, it may be 30, 40 years before you see pro-life laws going through again. And that's ridiculous. But that's what's at stake. Before Scalia left, it was a 5-4 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court on 2 occasions that, all right, the Second Amendment, we will let you privately keep guns. Scalia's gone. Now someone opposite philosophy comes in by a 5-4 margin, you lose the Second Amendment. The rights of conscience, we had 7 cases at the Supreme Court this year on the rights of conscience. Religious conscience, does a Christian have a right to live out his faith in public? 5-4, we lost some, we won some, and some were tied because Scalia wasn't there. So the ability for a Christian to express their faith publicly, live out their faith, we could lose that for the next 30 to 40 years. Consider yourself living in Cuba or somewhere in the Middle East or in France or Germany where you can't live out your faith. There is a lot at stake in this election.
This may be the most important election in my lifetime.
Well, we've said that every time, and every time it's become more important because Christians didn't do what they should have done each time before. And because Christians have not done what they should have done coming along the way, we're now at a point where we're looking at the precipice of the cliff, our foot's dangling out there over space, and we're trying to decide whether to lean forward or fall back. And it's not a good position.
But I can guarantee you that there are a lot of people watching this program right now who they are concerned about all these things we're concerned about, but they don't like either one of the candidates running. And I've heard Christians sitting here saying that they just aren't going to do anything, and that is unacceptable.
Andrew, that's the thing that has alarmed me most. I've actually had people say, well, I don't like any of them, so I'm not voting. Now, if someone happens to say that to me individually, I say, actually, it's impossible to not vote. Your vote is your voice. And so when you don't vote, you double the power of someone else's vote. And probably the most grievous thing out of this, there are enough Christians, conservatives that believe in the values of America, that if they would step up and vote, be a landslide in the election.
Absolutely. We could make anything happen in this nation if we would just take our responsibility.
Well, they think somehow they're going to be able to opt out of this because they don't like either candidate. Impossible. I think it was Bonhoeffer that said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Dr. Martin Luther King said something.
Inaction is action.
Absolutely. And to not decide is to decide. And so that's been the most alarming thing to me.
Let me take that from that position. I don't like the candidates. I don't like the lifestyles of either one. I don't like their positions. Neither one is a Bible-believing evangelical Christian. Don't like what I've got. Okay, temporary timeout. The Bible says, Proverbs 14:34, that righteousness exalts a nation. How do you measure righteousness? God's standards. How do you get God's standards in a nation? Isaiah 1:26, when God, in Isaiah, at the time of Isaiah, Manasseh was the king. He's the most wicked king in Judah's history. So Isaiah's there, and Isaiah having a conversation, and God says, look, I'm going to bring this people back to me. It's going to be a bit, but I'm going to bring them back. Here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you judges as at the beginning and lawyers as at the first, and then you'll be called the nation of righteousness. And so God ties the righteousness of the nation to the type of judges you have in the nation. Now, if we want righteousness to exalt a nation, it's not the presidents per se that will do it. It will be the judges that do it. We were just talking about the decisions from the court. So let's just ignore anything about the two candidates except what would they do with judges? Because if that's the key to righteousness, what will they do? On the one side, Hillary has said, I will only appoint pro-abortion judges, no options. On the other side, Trump has said, I'll only appoint pro-life judges. And by the way, here's the list of 11 that I would appoint. Now, that list of 11, I could have chosen that list. I mean, that's the guys I believe in. I'm very involved in that arena because he went to the Federalist Society, one of the most conservative, constitutional, judicial organizations out there, and that's who Trump is looking to choose his judges. Now, if I say I don't care about anything else in the election, I don't care what happens anywhere else, and I look at that, my decision's made for me.
Yeah, Trump has said that he would use the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation,
Jim DeMint and those guys at Heritage,
to vet the Supreme Court nominations, which, man, that's just awesome.
That all by itself, and you were talking about you get some younger guys in there, and by the way, on that list, so many of those judges that Federalists came up with were in their 40s, which means you could have 30, 35 years of those guys, and you're talking conservative, constitutional, God-fearing, moral value kind of people who are good on our issues. You have that as opposed to someone who does exactly what happened in the last term, and that's not an option. Yeah. So if I take that, but let me jump one other issue. We go all the way back to Genesis 12 where God says, Abraham, I'm going to make a nation out of you, and whoever blesses, I'll bless, whoever curses, I'll curse. Just take the position of Israel, because that's also a no-brainer. If the nation opposes Israel, God's going to oppose us. It's real simple stuff. You've got Hillary that is so pro-Palestinian, so pro-Arab Spring, Muslim Brotherhood kind of stuff. And you got Trump, who is, no, Israel is our best friend. We will support them. This is nonsense what's going on. The deal with Iran endangers Israel. Jerusalem's an undivided capital. That's the center.
He just made a statement with a group of Christian leaders. Were you there?
I was.
And he just, I was reading Janet Boyne's report on that, and he said that he is pro-Israel and that he really dislikes the way that the Obama administration has leaned and geared everything towards Iran, and so he's very favorable to it.
Well, the two biggest things in the Bible that bring blessings on a nation, you have a clear contrast over. Now, you can debate the other things that are out there. You can debate what they want to do with tax policy. You can debate what they want to do with anything else. You can't debate what they say about judges in Israel. And those two are opposite. And for a Christian to say, I'm not going to vote, you just said, I don't care if righteousness exalts a nation, and I don't care if the nation turns against Israel and God opposes it. What do you mean you don't care? On those two issues alone, if you're going to be in right standing with God, you better get on God's side.
Absolutely.
And that is right kind of judges and support Israel. And
so let me bring this up. Every time we go to talking about something like this, you are going to have Christians that are going to say, you guys have no business doing this. You're violating separation of church and
hope
state.
So. Yeah.
And all of the Johnson Amendment and stuff. And also, by the way, Trump said that he would overturn the Johnson Amendment that was passed in 1954 that a lot of people have used to muzzle.
It was interesting in a private meeting with Trump, and Trump is not evangelical.
No.
Doesn't claim to be. Nobody's claimed that for him.
No.
But he walks in and said, you guys don't have any power. He said, the guy walking down Fifth Avenue has more power than you Christians do. You've allowed yourself to be silenced. That Johnson Amendment won't let you talk. Everybody else got free speech. I'm going to repeal the Johnson Amendment. That's not right that Christians can't talk.
Yeah, but first of all, the Johnson Amendment does not really restrain us, but the way it's been interpreted.
That's right.
So anyway, my point is, Mark, I'd like you to share just briefly about how you came out of the closet.
Oh my gosh.
And started.
Well, wait a minute. What's that?
Yeah, let's define which closet we're talking about. How about that 2-foot square box behind the pulpit?
Oh, that closet.
Yeah, that closet. Because, and especially if pastors are listening today, my life really changed with a 3-page article David wrote called The Black Robe Regiment. And you had 101 footnotes for that, talk about being thorough, but I had never heard of the Black Robe Regiment. I grew up in West Texas. We prayed every day in school, read scripture. It was a large school, but I never had heard about the Black Robe Regiment. I thought, is that some kind of judicial thing or something? You know, I'm thinking black robes. And found out it referred to the pastors and clergy of the day, and that Black Robe Regiment, that was a backhanded comment by the British. They bemoaned the fact that the clergy, the pastors, were so vocal. They said if it hadn't been for those that Black Robe Regiment, i.e. the preachers and clergy, if it hadn't been for them, we'd have won this war, you know. And of course, Peter Muhlenberg being one of the most famous and iconic, and it changed my life. And all of a sudden I got to look, and I never really signed up to be silent. I was kind of taught that, assumed that. I had never really heard of the Johnson Amendment until I learned about ADF, and they have a little 4-minute video, and I said, we have just been duped into silence. I personally believe that the media, what's called the mainstream media, my own feeling is that's not the most powerful force in America. Pulpits are. The Bible says God chose the foolishness of preaching. And we have a mutual friend.
But the mainstream media may be more faithful to their calling than the pulpit is.
They're louder, and they are the squeaky wheel out there. And if pastors are listening today, I can't tell you enough, because my journey started in 2008 in the summer. I had this time with the Lord, and I kind of started going, Lord, are you telling me that this administration that's up and coming, which would have been Obama, is going to get elected? And my insides were like, it was no secret. He wanted to fundamentally transform America.
That was his campaign promise.
And that's when my journey started. So in 2011, I started doing a series called America the Beautiful. And it centered around July 4th. And then the real change came when I participated in Pulpit Freedom Sunday, October of 2012. Told everybody who I was voting for, who I hope they vote for. Media was there. Had attorneys lined up through ADF that if anybody was to pull us into court. You know, after thousands and thousands of pastors speaking up, no takers, because Our constitutional rights have been violated, but we've allowed them
That's right.
to be violated. And so that's where my journey started. And then, of course, the way the Lord brought all of us together. But
So you got up and started speaking out publicly, and what was the headline in the local paper?
Local news stations, all three of them were out, and somebody texted me that afternoon and said, you ought to watch the 5 o'clock news. You're the headline, and it was local church breaks law, preaches politics. So I got up next Sunday.
Breaks law.
Yeah, breaks the law, preaches politics. So I got up and I said, look, if I had done that, I'd own it. But the fact of it is, I did not break the law. And I did not preach politics. Now, I've said this before. I believe you can get in the pulpit as a pastor and be political and not truly spiritual. But I believe it's impossible to be genuinely spiritual and not touch politics.
That's a great statement.
Because, number one, last time I checked, life and death, abortion, that's a moral issue. That's not a political. It happens to show up in the political arena. And so what began to happen was, as I started to stand up, it was part of the journey the Lord had for me. If pastors and clergy in the founding era of our country had the attitude we have today, we would have never had a country.
That's right.
They were bold. We used to have pre-election sermons. And when things happen, I know, David, you've got probably one of the largest collections of sermons of our founding era. It blew me away. When things happened, people would go to the church, whether it was an eclipse or fires or whatever, to find out what's going on.
David, could you give the stats on how many quotes in the Declaration or the Constitution are from sermons? I mean, we wouldn't have had a Constitution without the sermons of the day.
You go to the Declaration is a good starting place. And look at the Declaration, because that's our national birth certificate. That's where the philosophy of government is set forth. And in the Declaration of Independence, historians have documented that every single right set forth in the Declaration, and a little time out, the Declaration starts with 155 words that give the 6 fundamental principles of government. Follows it up by 27 grievances showing how rights have been violated, and then ends with the conclusion that we're going to create a nation that doesn't have this nonsense. So historians have documented every single right set forth in the Declaration of Independence had been preached from the American pulpit prior to 1763, which means you ought to try reading the Declaration of Independence as a list of sermon topics, because that really is what it is. And people do that today. I didn't know the Bible talked about that issue. And the interesting thing even about that is we started the conflict in 11 years before we signed the Declaration. We're having conflict with Great Britain, and we're trying to reconcile. We tried for reconciliation in 11 years. We did everything, olive branch petitions. We let them shoot at us, and we didn't shoot back in the Boston Massacre, all sorts of things. And finally get to the point where there's irreconcilable differences and this is not going to work, and to obey God we have to separate. And that literally is what happened. In that period of time, Sam Adams and Richard Henry Lee and all these other founding fathers said, you know, if it comes to the point that we can't reconcile years from now and we have to have a break, our people need to know how to think on this. And what they started doing was, with the Sons of Liberty, they called it, they had committees of correspondence where they put out information and sent it out all over the country for colonists to read and get their thinking right. And so Sam Adams did a particular piece, The Rights of the Colonists as Christians. He said, if you don't understand this conflict, what's about to come, you need to get in the New Testament, because that's, and he just keeps sending people back to the Bible. One of the works that they reprinted in the Sons of Liberty and the committees of correspondence was some sermons by the Reverend John Wise. Now, John Wise was a preacher in Massachusetts in the 1680s, Ipswich, Massachusetts. And you'll find that by about 1687, he had preached this sermon looking at economics in the Bible, and he said, well, the Bible's really clear. Taxation without representation is tyranny. He preached a sermon looking at different forms of government in the Bible, and he says, well, it's really clear. God wants the consent of the governed. He preached a sermon looking about God in the Bible, and he says, you know, all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life. And you go, those are all phrases in the Declaration. Yeah, because that was a sermon preached in the 1680s that was reprinted in 1772 for the Americans to read, and 4 years later when they do the Declaration, there they are quoting sermons. See, we had renewed our mind with that kind of thinking, and
But the average person doesn't have a clue about that. They would think that these were all statements of Jefferson and the Declaration and stuff, and yet they came straight from sermons.
This little book right here was first printed in 1690. The founding fathers who wrote the Declaration said, Richard Henry Lee said, quote, "We copied the Declaration from Locke's two treatises of government." Now, this little book right here, this happens to be, I think this is a 1774 edition. This is, 1774 edition. This is the one that was running around before they did the Declaration. The two treatises of government by John Locke, that little book right there. And you can see that it's not very long, and yet it cites the Bible over 1,500 times to show the proper operation of civil government.
Wow.
So this is, I was recently with a group of 150 pastors that, you guys tell me all the verses you can think of that deal with government. We got 7 verses, 1,500 right here. So our knowledge of the Bible in these areas, so you know what Mark has done, Black Robe Regiment jumping up and breaking the law like you did, but all you did was talk about the Bible, because the Bible was talking about this long before there was ever an American government. This is not political stuff. When God got His people out in the desert, He said, "Now I've got you, I'm going to make a nation out of you." Gave them 613 laws. Those laws addressed every issue you can think of today. Immigration, military, educate, you name it. So were those political issues? No, that was God telling His people, this is how you live. And so suddenly, those 613 laws that God gave, we can't talk about because they're political. You know, why don't we just open our Bible and start tearing chapters out because the government says we can? You know, that's nonsense.
And speaking of Bibles, David, I encourage everybody to get a hold of the Founder's Bible. You know, I'm challenging our congregation to at least read the New Testament through at least once, if not multiple times. So I'm reading through, but I'm reading every article in the Founder's Bible. It will blow you away. I have a conviction that, you know, Hebrews chapter 11 is called sometimes Faith's Hall of Fame. I honestly believe if it hadn't been written till the 20th century, some of our founding fathers would have been in Faith's Hall of Fame. They subdued kingdoms, they obtained promises, they quenched the violence of fire. And what I think it was Karl Marx that said, if you cut off the heritage of the people, they're easily persuaded. And that's what's happened in America. We don't know our roots. We don't know. And I did a study one time on heritage and inheritance. If you want to steal somebody's inheritance, you have to cut off their heritage or their knowledge of it.
Their knowledge
and
of
that, I tell you, if most Americans knew how much we've been duped in this nation just because of a lack of knowing our foundations, and it's Psalms 11:3, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, the good news is we can get back to our foundations, and if pastors are listening, I have the heart for pastors that get up and speak, because I promise you, the majority of the people in their congregation wants to hear him speak out. It's just generally a few squeaky wheels that'll come up, and you know, if that's all it takes to unsettle somebody, you know, you need to let them go. They're not with you anyway.
Yeah.
But back to the Founder's Bible, that is a treasure trove. David, that is a incredible treasure trove regarding our nation and our founding fathers. It will stir your faith like nothing else to realize America is a miracle. And we would not have this nation were it not for that Bible.
On today's program, you saw a portion of Andrew's interview with David Barton and Pastor Mark Cowart. If you'd like to receive the complete 2-hour interview, you can get it in its entirety on CD or DVD for a gift of any amount. Or you can become more informed, take a stand, and make a difference in today's culture when you get the Christians and Politics package. This package includes Andrew's interview with David Barton and Pastor Mark Cowart, Andrew's book titled Christian Philosophy, the Christian philosophy teaching on either CD or DVD, and the entire Breaking the Silence conference on CD or DVD that features a powerful lineup of speakers. You'll learn about America's godly heritage, have a better understanding of God's plan for America, and gain tangible things you can do to make a difference. This package also includes David Barton's Founder's Bible, which includes over 150 biographies from America's historical figures such as George Washington, John Adams, and Dr. Benjamin Rush. It's filled with insightful quotes about the use and impact of the Bible from American founding fathers and statesmen across the generations. The Christians and Politics package has a catalog value of $206, but you can get it today for just $159. You can order resources through our website at awmi.net. While there, you can discover more product details and download additional free resources. Or call our helpline Monday through Friday from 4:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Our helpline number is 719-635-1111. To write us, use the address on your screen. We appreciate your generosity and hope to hear from you today.